What's up, Summoners? Kingler here. RTA is a place where there are a lot of playstyles and a lot of different ways for you to get your wins, but one of such ways that a lot of people are actually starting to use and a lot of people enjoy is going to be none other than the aggro playstyle. And this is something that a lot of newer players don't really understand how it works and what they're trying to do, and even veteran players may not know what they're trying to do, and knowing this stuff can help you a lot more to help you draft and help you figure out when the best time to do something is going to be. So what we're going to be talking about today is going to be none other than the aggro playstyle, and then we're going to do that is first define it, what it means, what it is. Then we're actually going to be looking at some core staples that you do for the RTA drafting, and then we'll actually look at some examples from my recent match histories of a lot of the people that are actually playing aggro against me, because as you guys know, I'm a filthy tank player and booster player, which aggro actually tends to do very good on if you're able to guarantee yourself that turn one, right? So with that, if you do like the video, make sure you like, subscribe, and join the Discord server, link down in the description. Without further ado, let's get right into it. So first, starting with what is the aggro playstyle? So we've talked in the past about what cleave is. We talked about it in the RTA tier list of all these different playstyles. So what is aggro? Well, you guys may already know Bruiser, and Bruiser is typically going to be very tanky, right? You want to be tanky and put a lot of units that can survive for a long time. When you think about that, you often think of like 2 knights. You think of things like Fallen Cecilia, Last Rider Crawl, Bellion. You also think of very hard to kill units like Charlotte, Little Queen Charlotte. You also think of units like Stennet that can hide and protect the Stennet team compositions. And you typically don't see too many DPSs, right? You see them, and then you see very tanky. You also could think of things like a Robbie, right? For being very bulky, surviving, doing damage, right? That's the Bruiser playstyle. On the other hand, you have the Cleave playstyle, which is going to be just all out, putting yourself out there. If you die, you die. If you win, you win. And you often think of units that set up very quickly, like Cerise and Challenger Dominiel. You think of those units that are very squishy, right? Like Domi, who gets just blown up if she doesn't kill, but can do crazy single target damage. You think about things for the setup, such as Flan, that gives you that massive attack buff, that big advantage, and then you blow up the opponent before they get the chance, right? So that's Cleave. But then what is aggro? Well, aggro is actually going to be between these two playstyles, where you don't completely give up your tankiness for the damage that you're able to do, right? So that is what aggro is going to be, and you kind of have to have a basic understanding of Cleave and Bruiser to know why it's kind of in the middle. So essentially, it takes the best of both worlds and combines it into one strategy, which is going to be aggro. So what is it taking from the tank side? Well, from the tank side, it's taking the support aspects, right? Because typically, the knight side has a lot of really good knight units, right? They have things like Crawl, you have things like Crimson Armin that completely block the opponent out. You're thinking things like that completely block out opponent's advantage, that give you massive turn advantage. Also the supports and tanky supports such as Amelia, right, who's able to give you attack buff, who's tanky, who can heal, who can cycle, and even things like Maid Chloe, who make your team, you have to kill them twice and gives you a lot of support. You grab those units from Bruiser and tank playstyle, and you combine them with the very heavy DPS units from the Cleave side, such as someone like Strasser, right, who's a unit who he can kind of survive, right, and with some support and attack buff, he can very easily do his job, right, of doing very big damage. Or even someone like the Stennet, whose has massive access to souls, is decently hard to kill. And then if you have someone like an Amelia or a Maid Chloe tanking for her and protecting her, she becomes increasingly hard to actually kill, but you're able to still do very high damage. So that is going to be what the aggro playstyle is like, combining the best of both worlds from Cleave and from Bruiser. So how does that look like draft wise and kind of like the staple core? So typically you are going to be seeing a support types units as well as staple DPSs, and then some other options for aggro teams, right? So the big thing with the staples is that these are units that they're very standalone and they provide huge support. And an aggro draft will typically have 2 supports and 3 DPSs, which is a lot more aggressive than a lot of different units. So I will write that down for you guys so you guys can see it a little bit better. But essentially, the team core consists of 2 things. You have 2 supports, typically 2 support units. These are units that are going to be giving you attack buff and are going to be giving you turn advantage, right? That's the big thing with the aggro playstyle. And on the other hand, you're going to have 3 DPS units. It doesn't really matter what they do, but they're just there to do damage, right? And they're there to kill the opponent. So that's typically how you're going to be drafting. And you typically will see a big combination of these, as well as any other unit that can do very high damage and can take turn 1 advantage away. So first, with the team core, we have supports, right? Who's going to be giving you attack turn and advantage. That's typically where you see Maid Chloe and Amelia, and they are extremely staple to this type of playstyle, right? Because without Amelia or without Maid Chloe, you're losing access to attack buff, you're losing access to that support aspect of an aggro team, and you just are basically playing cleave at that point. The other one is going to be someone like Crimson Armament, because it's a 1-9 Aureus and Adamant Shield. You just get so much damage mitigation on one unit that if they don't ban this unit and you keep all your DPSs, it's going to be extremely hard, and then you just basically change it into a Bruiser draft, right? Which is really, really nice because you have that flexibility. So you'll typically see 2 of these or any other type of support unit, and I have some other strong options here, such as General Purgus, right? Who's going to be giving you the attack buff. DN if there's no access to Maid or Amelia, right? And these type of units are very, very helpful. Or if you're even going more defensive, someone like Ruel, right? Or if you're going more aggressive, you can even grab things like Fairy Tail Tenebria, who can also guarantee you that turn 1 advantage, although it's getting closer to a little bit of cleave. Then you're going to be having the DPS units. These are the units that are going to be carrying your damage and are just going to be making sure you're getting the advantage that you need to do big damage, right? And Charlotte, even though she's a bruiser unit, she does fit into aggro extremely well. Why? She's very hard to kill and just does insane amount of damage, right? So you have a unit that is not going to be dying easily, who's going to be pumping out DPS. So she's going to be fitting into that team core very nicely. Then you have a unit like Strasse, who fits the initial part of the DPS because you're able to just open with him. You're able to give him CR and attack buff with Amelia potentially, or just have him open by himself and then cycle him with Amelia so he can take on S2 later on, or do a combo where the Strasse takes care of the knights, and then you have someone like a Landy getting pushed up by the Amelia and getting a bunch of advantage that way, right? So Strasse extremely staple right now to the aggro playstyle because you're able to just immediately make it a 3v4, and that's how aggro wins, right? Then you have things like Closer Charles, who are highly underrated. Not only does this unit do insane damage, but it also doubles up on your attack buff, right? Because very often they will ban your support as an aggro player. So something like your Maid Chloe, your Crimson Armament, your Amelia, they may get banned, but if you have someone like Closer Charles, they can't ban your attack buff, which means you're getting an attack buff as well as a really good DPS that, again, is hard to take out, right? It's not really easy to actually take Closer Charles out, and he's able to do a lot of support. You also have units like Kise, who are able to immediately create a 3v4 situation because you can either one-shot a unit at the gate, potential speed threat, right? So you're able to very quickly get big advantage early on and then out-sustain your opponent with your supports and just make it to a point where they can't kill you because you have too much support units, but you can kill them because you have a very high single target DPS unit that's going to make the fight really hard for them. You also have things like Spectre Tenebria, again, just an incredible unit, even though Bellion does help stop her a lot. But again, access to souls, very high single target damage, very hard to take out when protected by things like Crimson Armament, Maid who's giving an attack buff, or Amelia who's giving her an attack buff, allowing her to cycle and do very high damage. And then of course, you have none other than Landy, who is arguably the best DPS in this game. I should honestly, this is not ordered by the way, but she's honestly going to be one of the most staple core for aggro. Her plus Maid, her plus Amelia, it's just so much damage. You will be very hard pressed to beat tank at Landy out, right? It is extremely difficult to actually tank Landy out properly, and you will be getting blown up if you're able to secure an attack buffer as well as Landy, right? Which is why she's off to ban. So that's typically what you're going to be seeing for the staples. And again, for the core, you need to remember that you're trying to get 2 supports to give you attack and turn advantage as well as keep you alive, right? Let you be tanky. So that's why Fawn Cecilia is so good and why Crimson Armament is so good. And then you also will have your DPSs that can double as supports and take some of this and give you advantage as well, right? Which is why Strasse and Closer Charles are also really good. Some of the strong options going off of that is going to be things like Briar Witch Iseria, really good into dodge teams, because again, with Guiding Light, it is very hard to actually reach her. She does incredibly good damage, and with attack buff and the advantage that she gives is really, really nice. G-Perk, really good for giving you that attack buff, a really solid support option, very tanky, does some damage, another good one to fill that support role, and he can also take a big hit. Ross, if you don't have any of the other knights on here, still a really good unit, will require you to actually play around more with what unit you're bringing with him, such as your Landy, right? You have to have good support for Ross, because Ross is only as good as the unit that he's playing with S2, and typically you want souls to be able to actually cycle your S2, but again, it does extremely good damage as well as potential decreased defense. LQC, same idea as a lot of the other ones. If you're able to get LQC with attack buff, it's usually a force ban if they have a dark unit, which is why she's so good into FCC and a Ravi if they're trying to tank you out. Diane, if you don't have any attack buffer, if you don't have Amelia, you don't have Maid, she's an extremely good option to keep your team alive and give you attack buff. Operator Cigarette, same idea as Strasse. You can either make her very, very high damage or an opener, right? Where I think she can be a support or a DPS. I personally like the DPS one better, but you would typically push her up with Amelia, secure yourself a massive S2, S3, and then go on. Arbiter Vildred to punish squishy teams, right? Always really good. Mercedes to give, again, doubles as a DPS and an attack buffer, which is why she's so good. And then, well, in case you don't have a Crimson Armin and you have very high DPS units, it does allow you to bring one back, like a Stena. And if they don't have a lot of AoE, you can very much punish that, which again is a lot of options. There's a lot of different options that it didn't cover, such as Light Angelica, who's just amazing at getting you turn 1. And also sets up very nicely to the rest of your aggro team. By that same logic, Fairy Tail Tenebria, letting you get that turn 1 advantage, letting you aggro the up and down, letting you do a lot of work on the opponent, right? So that's going to be the standard for aggro. So now how does that look in practice and actually drafting? Because that's the part that a lot of people actually struggle with, is actually drafting. And excuse the losses, I definitely have not had a good week this week. So I definitely have dropped a lot lower than I should have. But for example, this has the semblance of an aggro team, but it can also double as a bruiser team, right? So on my side, you see me playing with a very traditional bruiser, with bruiser being typically 2 knights, 1 support, 2 DPSs. That's the standard bruiser slash tank drafting style, which is what I personally use. But on the right, you actually see more of the aggro style. You see the attack buffer, right? He has his Amelia, he has his mate Chloe, he has the Charlotte to do big damage, he has the Crimson Armin to protect a lot, and then he has the Sten and the Strasser to carry the damage. Once you ban the Strasser though, it becomes more of a bruiser draft because you have the 2 support, 2 DPS, and that's typically very standard of a bruiser draft. So without the Strasser, it is a very much bruiser draft, but you can see how quickly he can switch over to an aggro type draft with that Strasser pick. Again, the only problem that aggro rolls into is if you run out of damage, you are going to lose, or if you get out sustained. This scenario, it was a case of he didn't have enough damage to actually deal with the Luna, right? So that's why we were actually able to win that one, and where aggro kind of lost there. For this one, again, we see another aggro team. This also almost can double as a cleave, right? Which is why it's so nice to have an aggro and why it's between cleave and bruiser, right? Because you can very easily switch between one or the other, depending on the situation. But we do see myself starting with Landy. He immediately switches to an aggro slash cleave core, with Bazaar being able to give turn 1 advantage and the closer Charles being able to give the attack buff support that he may need. Then I start tanking up because I'm expecting the cleave, and he kind of doubles down on the DPS units with Strasser and Luna, and I finish off with Belian and a Ravi to try to punish any cleave. And there's a part where he messes up a little bit, because if he had grabbed something like a Mei Chloe, this game may have been a lot different, right? The reason why I was able to win this game is because he didn't have enough damage in his aggro draft, right? It's not quite cleave because he only really has 1 unit securing him, and he only has 1 attack buffer, right? So this is more about aggro draft. It's not traditional cleave. It's not something that gets turn 1 and breaks you right away. He's trying to get some advantage, but he's missing the support aspect of it because he picked the Bazaar. So a little bit more on the cleave side for aggro, but it's still considered aggro because, again, he only has 1 unit to guarantee him turn 1, whereas cleave will typically have 2 or 3. And no support, so only 1 support, kind of a mixed unit, right? So that one didn't have enough damage. For this one, we see an aggro team done very, very well and a very good pivot draft, showcasing the power that an aggro team has. He first picks Ross, which can be either a bruiser or an aggro type unit. I'm, again, going with my traditional booster core, and he immediately switches to Royal Carrot. Again, still looking bruiser, right? I'm still thinking, oh, he's gonna bruiser. Let me pick something like Landy, a Ravi, you know, because when bruiser matches, a Ravi is really good. And then he switches to complete aggro, where right now, when you can see, support, DPS, 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 right? Very, very standard aggro drafting, 2 supports, 3 DPS units. And I try to match him with my own aggro team, but again, his support is way better than mine. I end up with 4 DPSs and no supports, which is very bad aggro, versus he has a very good aggro staple with a very solid double support, triple DPS, has turn 1 priority, has ways to survive with 2 tanky units and steal the game later from me, and has the support so I can't just blow him out of the water if I decide to go to something more aggressive than him. So again, very, very good aggro style draft, right? And then of course this last one, another aggro style draft. You see I picked the Landy, he goes with Chloe. This is the part where he kind of messed up a little bit. He did go the double support, but going double attack buffer like this, it's usually better to go with a tankier support like a Crimson Armin. If this had been a Crimson Armin, I most likely would have lost this game, but because he went double attack buff support, I decided to start tanking up. He started going his aggro core with Strasser and Briar, his big DPS units, and I finished tanking up, and he finishes up with LQC. Although I only have the Robbie, right? And so I banned the LQC, and what he suffers is his supports are not enough to actually cycle the DPSs, right? He ran out of DPS, which again is a very big part of aggro. You still need that very early advantage. If you're not able to kill my units, you are most likely going to lose, and he did not have the damage or the support to out tank me or out DPS me, which again is a weakness of aggro, right? So hopefully that gives you a good idea on how aggro kind of typically plays. Again, supports are very, very important. They're basically going to be the staples as well as your DPSs. You need to have the damage as well as the survivability to be able to win with aggro. Again, what you lose to as an aggro player is tank drafts. Surprisingly, if they're way more tankier than you don't have the advantage that Cleave does to be able to cycle. So if you're not able to get huge advantage early on, you're not going to have the damage to actually outlast them. But you do really good into Bruiser stop drafts because Bruisers are not as tanky. You get way too much advantage early on, and you're still able to out-sustain 1 or 2 turns while your DPSs are able to cycle their rotations, right? And against Cleave, you also do struggle because Cleave always takes turn priority, and you're typically pretty squishy, which is arguably your worst matchup is going to be against Cleave, because if you're going against a Cleaver, you are not taking turn 1. You are going to be dying because you have a very squishy team core, right? So again, that's what you want to watch out for as an aggro player. So hopefully that gives you an idea on the playstyle. Give you an idea if you want to try it out. If it's fun to you, you can definitely try it out. But hopefully this guide was helpful in kind of helping you understand how that team works. That's all I got for you guys today, and I will see you next time. Peace!